Okay, so we've been looking at arrays as instance variables inside of our objects. What we're going to kind of transition to is object arrays as instance variables. But before we get into that, we really need to look at object arrays, right? We've been working with objects, we've worked with arrays before, but we haven't really combined those concepts. And so that's what we're going to look at now. I'm in IntelliJ, and I'm just got this little basic little test class, and I'm gonna kind of dink around, right? We've been working with arrays. We can create an integer array with like a length of 3, and this one doesn't particularly have anything in it, so it's going to be initialized with the default values of an integer, which is 0. Okay, so to kind of prove that, right, I want to print it off. And you should know from experience, if I print this, I don't really get the contents of my array. What this is the reference, the pointer, if you will, where this array exists in memory, whatever. We ended up like having to loop through and print the contents, but we're adults here, kinda. I'm going to show you a little something something. I'm going to use arrays.toString. Now this is red because, as it turns out, this is a class that I need to effectively import. In IntelliJ, if we hover over it, we can hit Alt-Enter, and that'll get imported. This is outside the subset. You're not really supposed to know this, but it's going to make our life a lot easier because this is a utility class, meaning all the methods that are in it are static. And take a look here, right? I'm calling a toString method. It is coming out of the arrays class. I did not make an arrays object. I'm calling the static method, and what it does is it produces a string representation for me. So I'm going to execute this, and as we see, our array with a length of 3 has default values 0, 0, 0. Okay, and then of course we know we can come in and change these things, right? I can make that a 6. I can make the element at index 1 a 7, and I can make this one a, I don't know, 9. If I were to run it again, we'll see those new values. All right, so this is one way of kind of declaring, initializing, putting in values, populating, if you will, an integer array. We could also make an array of a different type if we wanted to, nums2. And in this case, it's a double array, but I'm not going to use this traditional new syntax. We know that there's an initializer list that exists. It's a quick way to not only declare the length, but fill it with values. Okay. And if I want to print off this array, which should have a length of 4 and have these values set, I can use my arrays.toString and print off nums2. I'm not showing you anything new here. I'm just kind of reiterating the idea. And while this is a double array, I only threw in integers. You could throw in doubles, right? You could also throw in integers. Note that once they're in the double array, they are doubles from that point on. Okay. The idea that we're transitioning into are object arrays. This is a primitive data type. This is a primitive data type, but we can make objects, such as a string array. So I'm going to create a string array here. Let's call it Avengers. And that's going to be a new string array. Now, if I don't initialize the individual indices, as I did up here on lines 8 through 10, it's going to be filled with the default value. This is an object. So what is the default value for object? I can quickly prove to you what it is by coming in here and using arrays.toString to print off my string array. And what we're going to see here is Avengers is filled with null. Notice that this is, or I should say, you should note, this is not a string at all. It's not the word null. It is pointing at the null object, which effectively is nothing. It's not even a string. Okay, that is different from if I came in here and I took Avengers at 0 and said it is an empty string. Right, here is an empty string, is a string with a length of 0. It is a string object, whereas null is not even. Okay, if you really want to confuse people, you can come in here and set one of these values to null. Do not recommend you pretty much ever doing this, because then I can't tell which is null and which is null. You know what I mean? Let's instead fill this Avengers array with, Avengers. How about the original 5? Iron Man, Hulk. Avengers at 2, we'll do, Ant-Man. Wasp. These are the original 5, I promise you, don't at me. And lastly, Captain America. Okay, let's print that off. And you see that at each index, these indices are the same as they would be any other array. We're putting in strings as opposed to primitive data types like integers or double. Okay, what's interesting about this is these are strings. They're objects. Objects have methods. Think back to all the string methods that we can possibly call. So what this means is you can do string stuff with each element. The whole thing, Avengers, is a string array. Each individual element, however, that is like Avengers at 0, is a single string. Let's kind of demonstrate this idea using a loop. I'm going to create a loop. And what I want to loop through is my string array, which is called Avengers. So I'm going to loop through Avengers.length. Okay, so while Avengers is a string array, Avengers at a particular element, say Avengers at I, is a string. What I'm going to do in this case is let's print off the length of each string. Okay, so I'm going to use an SOP. If I were to print Avengers at I, that's the literal string that is there. And so in this case, we're printing each Avenger on a single line. But if I wanted to know what is the length of Iron Man, well, Avengers is a string array. Avengers at I is a single string. So if this is a string, I can do string methods. I want to know what is the length of the string. And there we go, right? The first element is Iron Man. It has a length of 7. Hulk has a length of 4. And we go on down the list like that. Okay, so here we have a for loop that's looping through it. Another one I kind of want to show you just super fast is the for each loop, right? We did a for each loop with integer arrays, with double arrays. We can kind of do the same here. But what you want to keep in mind is what we're looping through here is Avengers. So the entire thing is a string array. Each individual element is a string. So I will say for each string, which we'll refer to as, how about Avenger, just a single one, in Avengers. I know historically my students don't like for each loops. One, you gotta know them. It's part of the AP subset. But two, I think they become a little bit more relevant when we get to object arrays, right? Because this syntax is really clean compared to this syntax. When you start getting into stuff like this, it can get messy. But if we were to use a for each loop to accomplish effectively the exact same thing, well, with each iteration, I'm going to print off Avenger, the current string, dot length. Right? This and this are effectively the same, whereas this and this are effectively the same. Let's take a look at that. Awesome. Okay, now let's consider just like one more thing, just showing you that this is a string. We can do any string stuff with it. Say I want to print off the first character or something like that. Well, with each iteration, I have the current string. I can call string methods. So if I do a dot here in IntelliJ, it shows me all the string methods we could possibly do. I'm going to print off the first character, so I'm going to do char at, and let's say index 0. Okay, So we're looping through Avengers. Avengers is a string array. Each individual element is a string, which I am calling Avenger. I'm going to print off by going inside of that string, pulling out the character at index 0. And there we go. Iron Man, Hulk, Ant-Man, Wasp, and Captain America. Okay. In the next video, we're going to do some coding back practice involving string arrays. So tune in for that one. We'll see you then.